Thanks for spending your afternoon listening to this really enlightening and entertaining subject, budgets, the one we all love to hate, I see. Okay, as he mentioned, I'm with Chevron Phillips Chemical Company. That is a 50-50 joint venture between Chevron and Phillips 66. We have a lot of the plastics and feedstocks and most of the downstream things, except we don't have any refining. We have, you may have heard of Marlex plastics. If you have anything plastic, it's either going to be polypropylene or polyethylene. We make both of those products. We also do a lot of licensing in the area of polyethylene. We have licensees all over the world. And we have aromatics, drilling fluids, and many specialty chemicals. So as you can imagine, we have a pretty varied portfolio. I have responsibility for all of the resins and catalysts that go into the polyethylene market, and that really is our largest business. There we go. These are just a few of our sites, our manufacturing locations. We also have sales, marketing, and R&T sites. So we're truly a global company. What I'm going to talk to you today, though, is about our essentially budgeting from a patent portfolio standpoint. We don't have a huge trademark portfolio and hardly any copyrights. Most of what we have in the area copyright came to us through Phillips 66. We do try to train our folks about copyright, however, because they come in from university thinking they can copy anything, which turns all your copy machines in your building into a terrible liability. So, yeah. So why this title? I think no matter what industry you're in, we're all at the same point with the budget. There's a limited amount of money. There's a pile of money. You're all competing for it. You have to substantiate your costs. If you're a staff department like the legal department, it's even harder sometimes. So I know just how these hummingbirds feel. There's like 12 of them whipping around trying to get to the same spot for some juice. And in the past, it's been really hard for us to substantiate what we actually need. One of my clients, I was trying to explain to them about patent prosecution, how I couldn't give him an exact number because of how the cost for patent prosecution runs. And he sat and he listened to me. And finally he said, oh, I understand. It's because the method you're using is like determining what color does a letter 7 smell like. And I think he pretty well had it figured out. So we put together a team because we recognized about 5 years ago we need to get a better handle on what costs we have and why we have those costs and how we can determine what they are and how we can manage them. So we had a team of people who were closest to the problem. We had our finance person for the legal department, a couple of paralegals, a couple of our IP attorneys, and we really looked at what is it that we really can't seem to manage and why is that? And the first thing was we've got all these different business units and they have different strategies. They have different products. Some of them use more R&D than others. Some of them commercialize a lot. Some of them have line extensions. Some may file new patents every year and others may file one every 5 years. So have a lot of different needs for these individual businesses, and we can't really give them a number as to what their IP costs are. We have a big problem with foreign portfolio costs. One of my paralegals calls the fees that come in from foreign government agencies extortion fees. I don't know any of you managing budgets right now, but there's been a big increase in the annuities that we get charged up to the time that the patent gets allowed, and then suddenly you have back taxes, and what's that about? So it's hard to manage all that and to figure out what it is. But
quick question. So if you have one patent on a compound or a product that's marvelous, typically how many nations might you pursue the patent? How many different jurisdictions?
Well, that's another good question. It's going to be different for all these businesses. You typically file where you have competitors, where you're selling product, so that'll be different for any of these businesses. Some of them are heavily in Europe, some of them are Europe, Asia. We have joint ventures in the Middle East, so we file in the Middle East sometime. And again, we're not sure how valuable any of that is. There are all sorts of lists you can look at, government lists, to see how much value these different countries put into intellectual property. But it's still pretty squishy as to what you're doing. And for example, in the Middle East, we'd have a portfolio in the Middle East, but the government is your partner. So are they going to let somebody sue you for infringement? On the other hand, you have to demonstrate to them that you're supporting their government agencies. So,
and you're playing in their sandbox.
Yeah, right. And it's a really big sandbox, too.
So, I mean, would that be normally like a dozen or 20 or 50 or 3? I mean, just ballpark-ish?
Well, I have business units that file in about 15 countries, and I have business units that file in 3. So it's kind of hard to take an average over all that, yeah. Yeah, so as I said, foreign portfolio cost, U.S. portfolio cost is difficult also. But the difference with foreign is you have exchange rates and things like that that come into play. So you might be able to figure out what's going to happen in a year, but we have to provide future budget forecasts, and we budget out 4 years. So when I call in vendors and I say, okay, how many patent ideas do you think you're going to file next year? They say, you know, darling, you can't schedule an invention. And you know, they're absolutely right. And the other side of that is I've worked for companies that invented by accident. That's like nylon, Kevlar, Teflon, polyethylene. Those were all invented by accident. So do you know how valuable that's going to be in the future? It's really hard to gauge your future budgets. And then corporate America, the other side of the future budgeting is every quarter we have to justify where we are versus what we said, where we said we'd be. So what kind of variance do you have from the budget? Well, you know how patent prosecution goes. It's like up one month and down the next. The end of the September, the U.S. Patent Office throws everything out the door at you because it's the end of their fiscal year. So then October, November, December can be really busy, but January, February, March, not so much. So I didn't have a way to go in with data to show them, yes, I still need this money. If you don't have what you said you would need divided by 4, they take it away from you. You've all run into that. Did they ever give it back or give you more money if you're over? Has anybody had that experience? I haven't. So if you've had that experience, I'd like to know if you have openings, because that would be... Our outside counsel costs are probably the least of our worries, because in 2002 we developed what we call a legal partnering organization. We don't have a huge portfolio like our 2 parents did. So we recognized to get attention from law firms, we really needed to have a book of business that was worthwhile for them to pay attention to. And furthermore, we needed people who really did understand our technology. So we identified 4 different law firms. We've been working with them for 10 years. We have cap fees that are very reasonable, but we also work closely with them if we've got something that's going to go over, because especially with catalysts, with chemicals, sometimes you'll have a 300-page application, other times you'll have one that's 60. So it just kind of depends on the technology and where it's going to go and that sort of thing. So we're pretty flexible and reasonable, and in return, they do a really good job for us. Same thing in the with foreign associates. We have tried to select those that maybe would cover more than one country. We've worked with 2 of the same EP firms for quite a while, and they give us some cap fees there as well. And we try to balance out by giving them our opposition work and any opinions and things like that. Same in the U.S. Opinions go generally to our what we call our LPO, or legal partnering firms. And then what I call lagniappe here, those are third-party patent searches, opinions, litigation. That's all covered under separate budgets. So that doesn't come into our prosecution area. But with opinions and oppositions, what we do is give the business some idea of what we think it's going to cost for what's already in the pipeline with oppositions, and what we think might be going on with opinions. And then every time we get something, we get an opposition filed, or we think we need to have an opinion written by outside counsel, we go sit down with them, talk about how important it is, and they make a decision a lot of time on the opposition. Sometimes we don't choose to assert an opposition, but of course we would always defend them. So we really have a really good relationship with with our business folks, with the managers, and they all come from a technical background, so innately they understand the importance of this technology. The next thing we did was look at our resources and see, okay, how can we determine some numbers, because everybody knows chemists and engineers, they like numbers, don't they? So and our finance people, we thought we liked numbers, but our finance people really like numbers. So we have an electronic invoicing system. It's called eCouncil, and what we were able to do was pull some reports out of that. So every month we can go in, or every day actually, we can go in and see within a time frame what have we actually spent, what invoices have actually been paid. And that's been really helpful to us. Do any of you have SAP for your legal invoicing? Yeah, I would think SAP is the same way. You could probably even get better and more reports out of something like that. So we also have a docketing system that's Computer Packages Inc. and or CPI. That'll give you, docketing systems are for docketing. They're not for data. That will just give you an understanding of the activity up to a certain point. But it will give you some good history. So what we did was we looked at the past 3 years, and we have a paralegal that's really loves to get into this stuff, and she did queries and figured out averages of how many U.S. applications we had filed, how many office actions we might have over a period of time. So we at least had some data that we could use to start out with as estimates. And we could also see what kind of trends we had in filing. And we put that in Excel spreadsheets. I've become a real expert at Excel spreadsheets because they're very useful, and they do a lot of, they help you keep track of things, and they add it up automatically, and I don't need that calculator anymore. So, and then we also had some estimation software. It was IP Global, and it's good for individual countries when you want to figure out how much it will cost, but we'd have to go in and figure out for every single country and then add it all up. So we kind of decided we'll do this on the law of averages instead of trying to get down that discrete. So that gave us some things we could do initially, but it didn't reflect the increase in fees over time, especially if you're doing that future forecasting. It doesn't reflect exchange rates. There's no way to determine your foreign cost to pull those out. And this was all based on averages, so we couldn't drill down to individual technology lines and to individual businesses. But it was a start, and here's what we used in the first stage. We went with this Excel spreadsheet. I know this is hard to see, but here's what we think it costs us. These are 3 attorneys. This number, it was a count, and it's the average number we figured, and then it will calculate a cost when you put a number in. Well, as you can see, every month I'd have to go in, and we'd have somebody run the queries, figure out how many numbers we put in, and then we go to the spreadsheet, put it in, and then we'd try to compare across the bottom with what our actual costs were, and it was very time consuming. But the first couple years we did this, at least we started to see, gee, we're coming in within $200,000 of what we said we were going to spend. Unfortunately, it was usually over, but still, it was, and actually when you have a pretty good sized budget, they go, oh, you're only over by $200,000? That's not too bad. Which kind of blew my mind, because $200,000 at my house is a pretty big number. So we thought it was a step in the right direction at any rate. Like I said, it was based on averages, but we actually started to get some pretty good tracking data, and we found that we had about a 10% variance from actual. Now, 10%, people think, well, that's not really much. But if you have $5 million budget, it's $500,000. If you have a $10 million budget, it starts to get to be real money. And when they're looking at now, like in the oil industry with the price of oil going up and down, up and down, up and down, they're starting to look at, okay, where can we cut? So if you've got a number with a lot of zeros after it, they're going to look at that number and see what you need to do. We were still lacking that specificity by business and technology. We couldn't identify the exact activities that were causing us the most cost because we couldn't pull them out individually. individually. We still weren't sure about the accuracy, and boy, was it time consuming. I keep joking about I'd like to get back to practicing law because I've certainly done a lot of administrative stuff. So we thought, everybody nowadays, I have some millennials working for me, and they are fabulous. Everything with them is, what kind of software is out there that would take care of this? So I was like, okay, go find some. And actually, they said, well, first we got to figure out what it is we need from this software. And they're absolutely right, because we have a really, what they call a kludgy system. It's our whole IT services, or whatever you would call it, it's all out there in the Ethernet, so I don't know what to call it. But at any rate, it's all patched on top of patched on top of patched. It came in from 2 different companies. They didn't want to start new. They just wanted to patch 2 things together. We're now at the point where, do we spend more money, get rid of this, and go with something new? But that's not going to happen right away, and we couldn't wait for it with our budgeting process. So whatever we found, it had to be easy to, we couldn't change for it, it had to change for us. I guess that's one way to put it. So we looked at, first of all, what kind of data do they provide when they're doing calculations for you? Are they actually getting this data from patent offices around the world, and are they updating it routinely? Are they using some kind of database from other customers they have to look at the average number of office actions and things like that, and the average time to issuance in different countries? And how big is that database? Is it 10 customers, or is it 4,000 customers, or is there some other way they do it? Like I said, it had to mesh with a lot of our current systems, not just our IT, but also with some of the other things we were using, like our invoicing. One of the big things for us would be support, because we do have all these IT issues. And do you pay more for that support? I don't know if any of you have some of these systems through Microsoft. My husband has a bunch of them. He has his own business, and it seems like every time he has a question, it's another bill from somebody at Microsoft about, answering his question. He didn't really answer the question. So I have a number of different users. I have patent liaisons. Those are technical specialists. I have paralegals. I have an assistant general counsel and a general counsel. And those 2, they're in a management position. They shouldn't be drilling around and fiddling with stuff on their computer. But they need some kind of report or some way to quickly get information when the CEO stops in their office and says, by the way. So that was a big thing for us. Has to be easy to use. If these systems are complicated, it's not going to get used. People just skim across the surface of it, because they're only going to do it maybe once a month at the most, and you forget by then if you have to go through 25 steps to get there. So we also wanted something that we could compare, because we had a manual process. Remember, we went back and did the spreadsheet, and we had some idea of trends, so we wanted to be able to compare to that. And the ideal situation was, would they let us compare before we actually acquired the product? Would they, they have webinars, and you go through what all they have. That would be good. Can you actually compare it for 6 months and see if it's really going to work before you commit forever, for life? So that was a big thing. And cost, of course, that is always the biggest with us, is how much is it going to cost? So we actually found a pretty good solution. It was one of my paralegals and we looked at a lot of different things, but she actually found this. We looked at a lot of docketing systems, and most of them, again, they do docketing. You can get data out of them. We wanted to be able to follow some of the things with cost. And we had changed docketing systems 2 years after the company was formed. And I was greeted one morning with 3 people in my office saying, if you change docketing systems, we're quitting. And I didn't think that was a good thing, because they're pretty valuable people. So it just had caused so much turmoil to start with that it doesn't look like something we're going to do soon. We may eventually, but again, we needed to do something quickly with this. So what we found was Portfolio Estimator by IP Global. I think they're called Quantify IP now. this actually had a system that you could look at your whole portfolio, not just the individual foreign countries. So we tried it. It lets us make some assumptions about how many applications we're going to file each year, and then it calculates what foreign filings you have, the prosecution you probably have, and the costs that will be generated by those. But then it also takes your whole portfolio that is in your docketing system that's pending or that's issued but still in effect, and it calculates cost over the life of that patent. So I could go out 4 years now and see that I had some pretty good data there, and so that's worked for us really well, including we were able to track our actual expense, continue to track our actual expenditures each month, and then we still had that comparison sheets. So this is just a screenshot of what it is. They have a number of things across the top, but the thing we use the most is reports. We can develop specific reports based on what it is we want. And it took about 6 months to implement, mostly because of our IT system, but they spent a lot of time working with us. They worked around some things that we had that were issues instead of us working around them. They worked closely with our IT people. In fact, I worried that maybe they might hire some of our IT people who were really, really good. And so now it's given us some easy access for our Assistant General Counsel. In fact, our General Counsel, the scary thing is he thinks it's so good that if we're ever off very much, he's going to wonder what happened. He came to my office the other day and said, this is working really well. I wish we could do this for litigation and other things. But I don't think I've seen a system like that, and I'm hoping they're not going to ask me to do that. So, and I think one thing I might mention is that we didn't have any charges for updates, and the cost for the system, it's an annual subscription based on the number of cases in your portfolio. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And ours has gone up because our portfolio has gone up. So it's kind of grown, the cost grows with the portfolio instead of you starting out at a certain amount. We're finding now that our variance was reduced from hundreds of thousands down to thousands. Last year our variance was $10,000 from what we actually spent. Not bad for a $5 million budget. Yeah. And when clients complain about the legal expense that they've been allocated, I can pull out what their IP expense has been and show them, okay, your legal expense was this because you had litigation over here, you had this going on over here, you had an acquisition and all that legal work there from in-house counsel, from outside counsel, and here's what your IP expense was. And by the way, your IP expense is for assets, not activities. So it gives them a whole different perspective when they get into patent committee meetings. They're no longer saying, well, are we going to commercialize this? And I always want to say, how in the hell do we know at this point? But I try to be nice. Because you don't, if it's coming from R&T, you really aren't sure when it's, or if it's going to be commercialized. If it's coming out of your development group, you got a pretty good idea, but otherwise. It's also easier to convince clients what foreign countries they need to go for coverage. You're not going to cover the whole world. Let's talk about that. Do you really want to file in Nigeria because you're not going to do anything other than put that check in a waste can, as far as we're concerned? On the other hand, if you have a licensee in France, maybe you should have a patent filed there for something you're going to sell. And the most important thing for me was I was really able to justify those quarterly variances. What I've learned over the years is that finance people, they just love spreadsheets, and they just get so excited about these pivot tables we can give them now. So those and graphs we can show them, so we can go in and say, okay, we're down this quarter, and the reason for that is, but see, we're going to be back up this quarter, as the figures show over here. So they're good with that. Here's our continual reality check, I call it. The green and the yellow are both data that comes from the Portfolio Estimator. The green is based on actual docketing up to that point, because it goes up, this one goes up through August. The yellow is still an estimated projection. And again, that's based on your whole portfolio that's still pending, that's issued, and then also what you've just recently filed. This pink across the bottom, that's the actual. And we input that every month as to what our actual expense was that month. And then the white that I somehow didn't get a color in, that's your portfolio estimated projection from up above there. And then the pink over here is your grand total, and the blue up above would be a grand total. So we can watch all year long. And it's been interesting to watch how they come together. The first 3 months, you're like way apart. And then as you get closer, it gets tighter and tighter. So for instance, right now I'm looking at the end of the year and working with my boss. We're saying, okay, we're still under budget. So maybe what we want to do is have our law firms in December bill us in December, because normally those bills come in January. Because we know we've got this budget this year, and next year we've been told it's going to be cut. So that's been another thing that's been really coming to manage it. Whoops. So our product.
For discounted moving in December.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the products and resources that we're using, I mentioned the Quantify IP, the Portfolio Estimator. That's, to summarize, it's for issued, pending, and forecasted patents. We can set up scenarios, and we can actually say what countries these different technology groups are going to file in and how many patents we think they'll file in there. Computer Packages Inc., that's our docketing activity. They've been real helpful with us too in getting the spreadsheets, helping us form the spreadsheets we need for the input into the IP, into the Portfolio Estimator. As I said, we used eCounsel, that's from Miratech. They do that for invoicing and our actual cost, helps us track that. I love Microsoft Excel. I'm getting used to its little quirks, but it gets better all the time. And there's so many ways we've been able to use it. In fact, recently, one of my paralegals put together a spreadsheet and had it pull in some data from SAP for something totally different. And so we're all becoming more astute about all these tools that we have. And then I really can't say enough about our own IT department. They've practically been on call with us in a lot of situations, but they really helped us for the 6 months to really get things going. So I think we have time for some questions. If anybody has any?